This is Johnny, my third son. He is 10 years old and in 5th grade. This movie is about Johnny's efforts to learn all the states and capitals, a 5th grade requirement. Johnny is also supposed to learn, eventually, how to spell them all correctly. Johnny is mildly dyslexic. Memorizing the states and capitals, and spelling them correctly, is just the sort of thing that gives him trouble. During a family road trip, Johnny learned 2 sets of states and capitals in 2 very different ways. We drove through Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, and on the way back we drove through Indiana and Illinois too. He learned the states and capitals as we drove through them and visited tourist sites in them.
We are in Niagara Falls right now.
We talked with him about the routes we were taking. He completed a set of tasks related to the trip.
My mom made me make these little pictures of our route.
He located and mapped out the route. He discussed the routes with his family.
What happened after we crossed the Mackinac Bridge?
After we crossed the Mackinac Bridge, came down through 75.
He located the capitals in relation to our various locations.
Now, where is Lansing to where we were?
Lansing was a little bit east.
And he drew posters with the names of the states and capitals. And he learned a second set of states and capitals by reviewing the list over and over and being tested over and over. Every time he answered correctly, he got a piece of candy. Here's the list, here's the candy, here's Johnny with the candy.
I got an incentive to get candy.
The 2 different learning approaches I employed represent first, a behaviorist theory of learning, and second, a social constructivist theory of learning. Behaviorism. Think lab rats learning a path through a maze in order to get the reward of cheese. Social constructivism. Think of how young children learn language from family members. No one has to give them any cheese. They learn through observation, interaction, and imitation in a naturally occurring social environment. Back to the Mackinac Bridge and states and capitals. We did a pretest early on in the trip in the Holiday Inn right next to the Mackinac Bridge. Do you know where we are?
Michigan?
Do you know what the capital of Michigan is?
No.
Do you know what the capital of Indiana is? At the beginning of our trip, Johnny was truly a blank slate. So, how did these 2 approaches compare? Which method helped Johnny learn the most? I conducted a number of post-tests after the trip, and they tell the story. First, a few days after the trip was over, I asked him to recite the states and capitals. He was able to rattle off the states we visited and their capitals correctly and quickly. But here he is attempting to name the states and capitals that he had memorized for candy.
Utah is Carson City. Nevada is Salt Lake City. Texas is Austin. And Oregon is Semel.
Notice that he has translated Salem into Semel, a classic dyslexic misrendering of a word, which we corrected him on repeatedly, but that continued to persist. So he could quickly and accurately recite the capitals of the states we traveled through, but out of the 4 states he memorized for a candy reward, he correctly recalled only 1, and one of his answers was a word that doesn't actually exist. Then I asked him to locate the states on a map. I had not asked him to be responsible for learning this, but I was curious to see the results. He rapidly identified the states we had visited. Here you see him quickly writing the names on the states without any hesitation. But when I asked him to identify the states he had memorized, he could only find 2 of them.
Don't know where the other ones are.
Last, I asked him to write down all of the states and capitals he had learned. Keep in mind, I never asked him to pay attention to spelling, thinking that would be too difficult to learn in the short time we had. In the states he memorized for candy, all the capitals are correct, and he made 9 spelling errors. In the states we drove through, all the capitals are correct, and he made only 3 spelling mistakes. His relatively strong performance on this test is particularly remarkable considering his dyslexia. Now I know this is hardly a scientific experiment. The variables were not controlled well at all. Perhaps the behaviorist approach just needed more time. But despite these flaws in this project, there certainly is some anecdotal evidence here that the constructivist method led to more learning. But let's see what Johnny thinks. You tried learning states and capitals 2 different ways. Which one did you like better?
The one where I got the candy.
How come you like that better?
Because I got candy.
Johnny's answer surprised and disappointed me and brought to mind some of the criticisms of relying on rewards, be they tangible rewards or just praise, brought up by theorists like Alfie Kohn and Carol Dweck. An intense focus on external rewards can erode the innate drive to learn and eclipse the satisfaction derived from acquiring new skills and knowledge. Here are my recommendations to teachers. Use rewards sparingly and with caution. As much as possible, set up your classroom so that students can learn by listening, watching, asking, imitating, making attempts, reacting to feedback, and making new attempts. In other words, by being immersed in an engaging social experience in which students and teachers develop knowledge and skills together.